We're going to make a classic egg pastry crust that's really nice to use in pies and very nice and flaky. When you're making pastry, just remember that you want to work with the pastry as little as possible. You don't want to knead it a lot like you do with bread. The more you knead it and work with the dough, the more you form gluten strands within the dough, and that is what, in terms of a pie crust, can make it less flaky and not as flavorful. Because when you want a crust, you want it nice and flaky. So the things to help prevent those gluten strands from forming is to use ice water in your dough and to use distilled white vinegar. You don't taste the vinegar, and it helps prevent those gluten strands from forming and hence leads you to a better, flakier crust. We are going to be using Crisco in this pastry. You could use butter and have it an all butter pastry, but it does, the Crisco is nice because it actually, it does make it a little bit flakier than if you use all butter, and it holds its form better while you're working with it, whereas the butter can easily heat up in your hands and give you a little bit more trouble. So we're going to start real quick with, you want 3 cups total all-purpose flour. You could use a cake flour, it's fine. I have 2 cups here. We're going to add a 1/3 cup. And when you're, let me move this a little into the frame here. When you're measuring out flour, make sure you put it into what you're measuring and then level it off. You always want to level off like that. Okay, that's our 1/3 cup. We're going to dump it into the bowl here. You never want to just cake and go, you know, scoop down into it. That will compact the flour into the cup or whatever you're measuring out, and it will actually make for a less accurate measurement. Okay, so we have 3 cups here. We're going to add in 1½ teaspoons salt. Okay, just directly there. 1 teaspoon. And a half. And I'll just take this and kind of stir it a little. Very technical stirring mechanism here. Okay, so again, we just have 3 cups of all-purpose flour, 1½ teaspoons of salt. Okay, now we're going to take and cut our shortening into the flour. So this is just, you can buy the Crisco in these 1 cup blocks, so you could just use this, or you could just buy the big container and measure out a cup. But the 1 stick is 1 cup, and that's what we need here. So it's just easier to take the 1 stick and kind of drop it down in here. Okay. All right. Now we're going to take and cut up, it's called cutting the fat, or, you know, whatever you're using, some type of fat, whether it's the Crisco or the butter. You cut that into the flour using a pastry blender. So it's just has kind of slits. So basically it allows the flour and air to move up through, so it's not pressing things down. You just press down. You can see how it's kind of cutting up the shortening. Okay. And you're just working that around. Its contraption looks a little scarier than it is. It's not really, it kind of looks very sharp, but you just kind of can work that back out. And you just want to keep working that in. So we're just cutting the shortening into the flour. You could also, if you don't have a pastry blender, you could use 2 butter knives and just take the butter knives and kind of in a cutting motion against each other, cut through. So you cut up the pieces into it that way. So you don't have to use a pastry blender if you don't have it. You just want a way to kind of work it in without having, you don't want to take your hands and work it. Heat of your hands, again, the pressure of your hand is going to kind of crunch everything down too much, and the goal is to work things in, but to mess with it as little as possible. Okay. So kind of, what I kind of do is tilt the bowl a little and kind of let it fall through like that. So we get a nice, so you getting that flour off the bottom of the bowl. Just make sure we got it good. And it's going to kind of look like it's going to be a little bit clumpy. I'll show you here. Get this off. And you can kind of see how it's kind of pea, some of kind of pea shape, but it's kind of clumpy. If you pressed it together, it would kind of hold its shape a little bits and pieces. But see, it's not as quite as fine as just the flour on its own. Okay, so we have our Crisco cut into the flour and salt, and now we want to get our liquid ingredients together. So I'm going to move this over a minute. What I have here is 1 egg that's lightly beaten, and we're going to add a teaspoon of vinegar. Again, the vinegar you don't taste, but it helps the gluten prevent gluten from forming in the dough, which is good in terms of having a light flaky dough. Okay, so we're just going to work that in a little bit. The other key I mentioned earlier was you want a 1/2 cup of ice water. So I make just get a big measuring cup, more than I need, full of water, add in some ice, and then that way I can easily pour it into what I need to measure. But it is important you do that ahead of time, and just get a big container full of water and then put some ice in it so you get it really good and cold. Okay. So just going to mix that together so it just looks like which it is, very diluted egg. Okay, we want to add this liquid to our dry ingredients in about thirds. You don't want to add it all at once. You want to kind of add some of the liquid, work it in, add a little bit more, work it in. So we're just going to kind of pour some directly in. At this point, I'm going to just use this that I was using to measure the flour, to just kind of stir it together to kind of get that soaking in and start to bring everything together. At some point near the end, I will use my hands. You just do have to use your hands some, but you know, there's just no way to make a pastry without using your hands. You just want to do it, you know, minimally if possible. You just don't want to keep working, kneading, working. Add another third. Probably after this last one, I'll start using my hands. You can see it starting to come together here. Bear with me, I'm in a small space, so I'm going to get this all together, and then I'll move this over and I'll kind of roll it out. So just stir it just a little bit because I just don't want diluted egg directly on my hands. just for ease of working with it purposes. Okay. Get that off. Now you're going to have to, like I said, work with your hands a little. You just kind of want to bring it all together, kind of fold it. It does just get messy. That's how it is. Okay, sorry. I had to do that. Okay. Make sure you get all that flour off the bottom. It gets messy here. So you want to just get it into one cohesive big circle of dough. Okay, almost there. Okay, try and get some of that off my hands. Okay. Now this pastry makes two. So you can take like this, a knife, or this is a pastry lifter, and just kind of cut it in half down the middle. I'm going to scoot this over just on a frame, and I'm going to bring half of it and put a little flour down here. And you just kind of want to, with some flour down on the table, kind of work it into a little neater of a ball. You do have to work with your, like I said, use your hands here. I'm not saying not to, but just try not to do it unless you have to. And you have to kind of get everything cohesive and everything together. Then once you do that, I would recommend, just so it cools a little evenly, put it in a disc shape like that. So just press it down a little bit. And then wrap it up in some saran wrap. Let me get a little bit here. Bring it over. It might be hard to see, but you're just going to set it in the saran wrap and fold it over. Okay, and you want to let it rest for about 30 minutes, at least in the refrigerator. You can freeze these up to 3 months. You definitely want to let it rest for 30 minutes in the fridge, so any work that you did in any of the gluten strands that you formed by working with the flour do have time to rest, because that's another thing that helps them kind of unwind, if you will, because they're basically strands of proteins. Again, one thing that helps is the vinegar, the ice water, and letting it rest, because that lets everything kind of settle down and everything unwind, and then it leads, that will help lead to a flaky pie crust. So it's very easy to do. It's just, flour, salt, you cut in your shortening or butter if you want to use it. You have your wet ingredients, which is 1 beaten egg, a half a cup of ice water, and 1 teaspoon of vinegar. You mix the 3 of those together, and then you pour it into thirds into your dry ingredients, work it together, split it in 2, and wrap it up, and you have a pie pastry ready to go.